So lovely to see you all here today. Some familiar faces here to learn a bit more about building your organisation's resilience in the face of the cost of living crisis and subsequent crises that will probably be coming our way at some point in the future. If you don't know me already, I'm Philippa or Phil, and I'm the Senior Projects Officer at Beacon, and it's really wonderful to have you on this webinar today. So in case you don't know who we are already, I think a lot of you do, but Beacon exists so that no one faces their rare disease journey alone. We do this because there's multiple challenges involved with having a rare disease, such as the diagnostic odyssey, the lack of access to treatments, and also problems with everyday living and care, such as struggling to hold employment and facing everyday challenges with your rare condition. We do our work through three main kind of strands, which are patient group training, rare research, and bringing together the rare community. Today, we're here to help you in that patient group training aspect. We're really supporting you to grow your confidence, develop your patient group, and make sure you can build sustainability for the future. So today, we're building a little bit on what we learned about last week. We're learning about how you can build resilience as a small charity and become dynamic in the face of different challenges, how to clarify your mission to set funding priorities, planning for uncertainty and future-proofing your organisation, and different attitude and approaches that you can have to allow you to build a more sustainable organisation, as well as learning how you can manage risk for the future. So we're joined by the wonderful Claire Mills, and she is here from Charity Finance Group, who I've only just discovered, but actually I think they do absolutely wonderful work, and I think Claire will be able to tell you a bit more about what they do. And she's going to be running the training today and running you through some of those points that I've just shown you on that schedule. So I'm going to hand over to Claire now, who'll be sharing her screen and going through the training for you. As I said, please introduce yourselves in the chat so she gets to know you better, and hopefully you'll go away feeling a little bit more confident in building resilience for your small organisation.
Hi everybody, it's really good to be here today and have a chance to talk to you and share some of the learning that we've been developing over the last few months, in particular in relation to the cost of living crisis, but also over 35 years of being an organisation that is here to support, empower and help charities, voluntary organisations, community groups, faith groups, social enterprises who are trying to change the world for the better. And that definitely includes all of you lovely people here today. So we work to support the charity sector as a whole, to support organisations to become financially confident, dynamic and trustworthy, and with finance really at the heart of strategic decision making. So we want every organisation in this sector to be able to use finance to maximise your impact and to really understand your finances and what you can and can't do with them so you can make good choices. We do this at Charity Finance Group through our practical support, member helplines with experts at the other end of them, training, events, we share knowledge and expertise, and we're really the go-to body for all things charity finance. We're not funding experts, and we're certainly not fundraising experts. We work closely with the Chartered Institute of Fundraising on those things, but we do work with a number of grant makers and organisations. So please don't think I'm going to tell you how to fill in a form and get loads of money as a result. That's not really my thing, but it's about making the most of what you've got, as well as thinking slightly differently about how you do things. Sorry about keep looking sideways, I'm trying to read off of two screens here. So as well as charity finance, we work on things relating to leadership, governance and compliance, and that whole wider category of resources, whether that's finance, people, property, all those things. And we also support the sector through our policy work. Most recently, that's been focused on the next budget, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. And we've also been working on updates with the Charity Commission around their guidance. So we're also part of the civil society group alongside other charity infrastructure bodies such as Akivo, NCVO, Chartered Institute of Fundraising. And the civil society group helps us to combine our efforts for the sector and do work on things such as the Energy Bills Relief Scheme, dismantling racism, the procurement bill that's going through Parliament. So there are lots of areas that affect the charity sector where it makes sense to pool our resources as infrastructure organisations and to focus on our specialisms rather than all of us. We want to be collaborative rather than competitive. So that's what we do there. everything we're doing on policy at the moment is being dominated by the cost of living crisis. And alongside the policy asks and stuff, we've been gathering these practical ideas to possibly be able to help you. So looking at the first thing, I've got 3 different ways I want you to think about the challenges that are facing your organisations or your work at the moment, and how you can really question what you're doing, how you're doing, and what impact you're having. And the first thing to think about really is about whether the issues you're looking at need to be tackled as part of your strategy, or whether there are some tactics you can employ to tweak things slightly. So for instance, if you're in the fortunate position of having paid members of staff, tactically, you might think, well, should we give them a pay increase, or should we give them a one-off cost of living bonus if we can afford it, because then it's not hardwired into our budget for future years. If you were thinking strategically, you'd be going, have we got the right people in the right roles, or do we need to restructure our organisation? Do we need to change the jobs that we've got to make sure that they're delivering the work that we need to do to maximise that impact? So thinking about the differences you can make, whether it's that longer term strategic look or immediate tactical things. The next thing to think about is whether there are things you could do differently. Some things will have a higher financial cost, so you'll be looking at those very carefully, but are there other things you can do that might have a lower cost financially? They'll still involve people's time or other resources that you've got around and about the place, but actually are there other things you can do? So an example around this might be to do with energy bills. If you're fortunate enough to have premises, you might have to make a higher financial cost if you say go around and change all your light bulbs to LEDs, or you carry out some insulating work or install renewables. But a lower financial cost could be carrying out a behaviour change campaign with your staff, with your volunteers, with the people who use your premises, to really drive up that mindset of turning things off when people aren't using them, of making sure lights go off, of turning the heating down. So there are 2 different ways of thinking about the problems that might be facing your organisation. And the third way of thinking about things is it kind of connected to the strategy and tactics thing, but are there some quick wins you can have? Are there some small or immediate adjustments you can make, perhaps around deciding to buy supplies differently, or think about recycling stuff you've already got, as opposed to longer term things where you might have a contract that's currently in place and you're needing to start thinking about negotiating for what happens when that contract comes to an end. And that's also could be related to funding. Are there small pots of money that you can go after to keep your cash flow coming in, to keep some money coming in, and to just get you through so you can do that longer term planning? Now, the Institute for Voluntary Action Research, IVA, did some really good work last year around asking for resilience funding. So not just covering immediate project costs, which is quite often what we just see funders interested in. Then there's been a move over more recent years to include project plus core. So sometimes around 7% of a project money can be allocated towards core costs. But IVA took that one step further and built in the idea of asking for resilience funding. So demonstrating to funders that you are meeting a real need. You are here for the long term because this need is not going to go away. And I think that's particularly true of people in the rare diseases community. You know, unless cures are found for these rare diseases, they're going to continue to be with us. Because they're rare, I'm assuming that there's less focus on finding cures for the rare diseases than there is for mainstream diseases. So you're going to be around for the foreseeable future, and you need to build some resilience into your organisations. So how can you apply for extra funding to give you, say, backfilling for a couple of days a year to do that real longer term strategic planning? So that's an idea to think about there. I think when you are looking at where your money comes, not so much where your money comes in, but where your money goes, there are 6 P's to think about. And the first one of these is people. If you are fortunate enough to employ staff, or you're planning to employ staff, there's a lot you can do to make sure that you are doing the right thing by your staff. We know that at the moment in the charity sector, there are big issues around recruitment and retention. We're finding it people are finding it harder to find the right people for the jobs. And we're also seeing people leaving, not just moving around the sector to get better paid jobs, but actually leaving the charity sector to move into other areas, whether that's hospitality or retail, because maybe you can earn the same money with less effort, or you can earn slightly more money for the same amount of effort. So the first thing to think about is your people. If you're employing people and if you're working with volunteers, actually this counts for the same thing. How much are you aligning what you're doing with your values? How obvious are your values? How are you celebrating the people you've got and making them really understand how much you value their contribution? And if that's you as an individual working on a rare disease case and doing that work just yourself or as volunteers, that's equally relevant, because there's a lot going on at the moment. People are under a huge amount of pressure. We've come out of COVID, or we've moved through COVID, and we're all tired. And now we're faced with the rising cost of living, the frightening energy bills that many people are having, uncertainty, lack of clarity. All of that's taken a huge mental toll on people. And so anything we can do to support ourselves and support each other and make ourselves feel more secure is useful. If people are volunteering, please make sure you're saying thank you to them. Please make sure they understand how valuable their contribution is to your cause, because we're also seeing a real shift in volunteering. I was seeing some people who, because of their experiences during COVID, now feel more motivated to become involved in civil society, in charitable organisations, in campaigning and giving back to their communities. And people have seen it as one of the key elements to maintaining their own mental health, is to give, to be involved in your community. But we're also seeing people under increasing pressure to either work more hours or to meet caring responsibilities that maybe before they shared, because they're just under so much more financial pressure. So please look after the people is the first of the P's. The second P relates to place. That could also say property, premises, whatever. If you're fortunate enough to have a home for your operation and you're not working off people's dining room tables or kitchen tables or anywhere else you care to think of, have a look at the property you've got. Does it meet your needs at the moment? Does it meet your longer term needs? Go back to that whole strategy tactics thing and think, what's your strategy? Do you need to do what you're doing in the way that you do it from the place you currently do it? Can you make some adjustments around property? At Charity Finance Group, we found over the last 2 years, or 3 years really, since the start of COVID, that having gone to remote working, most people want to keep remote working. We're not seeing a big surge to return to the office. So we're looking at, closing the lease on our office and finding somewhere smaller that can be used for hot desking and supporting people like me. I live 300 miles from our office now, so I don't want to be in our office. I want to work from home. If home's not the people's safe place, or they don't have the facilities or the space to work from home, can you support people to work in a way that doesn't require you to have a great big building? Alternatively, with your property, if you have one, can you ask other people to come and share your space? Are there other ways you can maximise the use of that building? One way to think about that might be to do a building audit and think about all the different spaces in your building and just map out over the course of a week how much time those spaces are being used for. So if you've got a meeting room, how many hours a week is that meeting room in use? Can you rent it out for the hours it's not in use to other people? Or does it make you, once you've done that, look at your property and go, we're using 20% of this property 40% of the time. We're in the wrong place. One to think about. The next P is around procurement. If you're buying in supplies, whether that's energy or cleaning supplies or resources you need to deliver the services and the support you offer, could be IT, could be software. Have a look at those contracts and see if you are able to trim your costs on those, or at least have some security for the longer term. Procurement, I think we spend a lot of time in the charity sector doing relationship building. We do a huge amount of relationship building with our beneficiaries and with the people that come into contact with us. We do relationship building with our volunteers and with our staff, with the people we're trying to influence in terms of policy, with funders. But quite often we forget about suppliers, and the better relationships we have with suppliers, the easier it is to have those conversations around what's the price for this? What's the best price you can do? How long do we have to be locked in for? What could I get? What else could I get for the same amount of money? So spend some time thinking about those relationships. The next P is about products. And that maybe doesn't feel like something that we have as a charity sector, but it's about everything from support services we offer to publications and research that we have carried out to even down to literature or flyers or posters or our website, all of those things. Think about each of these elements. What are we using them for? Are they having the impact we need them to have? Could we think about doing this differently? Are we using the right channels for communicating? You know, if we're using our website effectively, do we then need a load of printed literature? Have a think about those different things and where you could maybe come up with some costs there. And also thinking to the long term, if you're creating posters, maybe think about creating a framework poster that you can then print into a space so that you can use the same thing over and over again. Really trying to think about how you can maximize the use you can get out of anything that you're having to pay for. The fifth P is partners, and that is about funders and people that you might have contracts with. So funders, please do have conversations with them about what your long-term plans are. Keep doing that stakeholder relationship management. Talk to them, send them updates. It might be that you've asked to fill in so many funding reports a year on what you're doing with the money. Have some time set aside for talking to people outside of that regular required reporting, just to touch base. We've found with a couple of our funders that they have said, do you know what, cost of living's tough, we're giving an uplift to grants of 10%. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Don't forget to say thank you to the funders. And other partners, if you are contracted to provide services, so some charities provide support services. I don't know if that's any of you, but if you're having those discussions, make sure that your contract, make sure you can start a conversation about your contract and about making sure you're getting full cost recovery, if that's what you're doing, that the money coming in is actually meeting the real cost of delivering that service. And go back to those contracts and say, come on, cost of living, everything's gone up. We are now subsidizing what you have asked us to do. We cannot do this, or we choose not to do this. And you may have to think about doing things differently and about your business model for the future if those contracts really aren't generating the income you need. The final P is plenty. And for a lot of charities, we know that this is a word that doesn't really feature in your vocabulary at the moment. But equally, there are still significant numbers of charities with reserves, with money in the bank. I think there's two ways to look at it. There's money you've got on hand that you're going to be spending in the next 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, year. And there's money that you've maybe got in reserve for the longer term. The key thing at the moment is to make sure that that money is working as hard as possible for you. So interest rates have gone up, and that's caused loads of people loads of problems with mortgages, with rents going up and so on. But if you've got some money in the bank, you can now at least start to earn some interest on it. So really just have a think about your cash flow. If you can move money out of your current account into an interest-bearing account for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, think about doing that. Talk to your bank and see if they've got an interest-bearing account that's going to be easy to operate for you, and see how that goes. Okay, so we've talked about the 6 areas that you can think about, and now I'm going to give you a quick tool to help you assess those things. And this is a tool that I like using. It's called 2 buckets and a bin. And really it's another way of thinking about what you do and trying to really drill down to, is what we're doing having an impact? Are we doing it in the best way possible? Are we doing what we need to be doing? So the first bucket is to put things in that you've that you thought through, and you've gone, okay, we do this, we need to keep doing this because, and please make sure you've got a because there, and that because fits with your strategic and charitable objectives. And we need to keep doing it in the same way as we currently do it. That is the best way to do it. So you put those things in bucket number 1. The second bucket is for things that you can consider and you can go, okay, we need to keep doing this. We want to keep doing this. It fits with our strategic and our charitable objectives, but we're going to start doing it differently. Now, whether that is looking at a printed mailer that you send out to 200 people and deciding you're going to change the frequency of it to reduce the production costs, you're going to ask people if they would prefer or be happy to take a digital version to reduce your costs. So it's about the how you do things, not the what you do, but how you do it. How do you have the same impact, maybe doing things in a slightly different way? If you run a call center or a helpline and you have people getting in touch because they've got a problem, do you need to operate for the same number of hours? Could you change the hours? Are you operating when people really need to get in touch with you? You know, are things going on at the right time? And the third thing is the bin. Are you doing things now that take time, take resource, maybe take money, that are not contributing to your strategic objectives? They're not contributing to your charitable objectives. They're just taking up time, space, energy that you could use to do some of the stuff in your buckets. And for those things, I'd say put them in the bin. I did this 2 buckets in a bin exercise at a large conference with some homelessness charities before Christmas. And I said, what sort of things might you put in the bin? And somebody shouted out, chairman's special projects, which is a phrase that fills people with fear. Oh, the chairman thinks we should do this. Or the trustees think we should do this. Okay, let's drill down onto that a little bit and see if it's something that really is contributing to your mission, or if it's something you could think about differently. That's all I'm going to talk about, really. I hope that's been some useful, thought-provoking stuff. Please do have a scan of the QR code and sign up for our fortnightly newsletter at Charity Finance Group and find out a bit more about us. We are here. We do quite a lot of our stuff is available free. Some of it's for membership. Membership is very reasonable. So just have a look at that if that's something you think you might want to find out about. But I think we should probably open it up to discussion, Philippa.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Claire, so much. I think some of those tips are really good, just to go back and look at what you're actually doing and see if it's working for you. At the moment, I have got some questions as well, though, Claire. So I think a question that I wanted to ask is that if you kind of look on the internet or even kind of on the articles that CFG is sharing, it feels kind of like overwhelmingly kind of negative. Obviously, we're not in a great time. And I think that can really add to kind of a sense of burnout and distress and stress that people who are running these small organizations feel anyway, in terms of having to kind of be constantly fighting fires. What's one tip that you would give in terms of trying to build confidence that people can actually take on these lessons and spend time thinking about strategy? Because I think sometimes strategy goes right on the back burner because people are just trying to deal with the everyday. How would you encourage people to build confidence to kind of build that strategic thinking into what they're doing in the everyday and giving themselves time to do that?
So, I think there's so much there, Philippa, but the first thing I would say is you're not on your own. You know, it can be really lonely running a small organization or trying to keep the show on the road when things are, it can be really lonely, but you are not on your own. You're doing great things and we thank you for that, but please don't feel alone. You know, being part of a community like you've got at Beacon for Rare Diseases and the sort of communities we offer at Charity Finance Group really can make all the difference. We've got a great testimonial from the finance person at Surfers Against Sewage down in Cornwall, and they're the only person that does finance in their organisation, and they're on the coast down in Cornwall and said it can feel so lonely, but I know I'm not the only one facing these problems. If you're faced with an issue or a challenge or a problem that you're trying to solve, you're not going to be the first person to have come across this problem, and you're not going to be the last, and the answers are already out there. So don't feel you've got to always start from a blank sheet of paper. I think that's the thing. And Googling is amazing. You can find so much help by Googling things and by finding resources. The second thing I would say, and this is really from my personal experience rather than from anything to do with charity finance, is make time for yourself in your day and try and do things that give you that positive connection with your community, with your family, with your friends, and get some fresh air and some exercise if you can, because it really does make a big difference. The early stages of the COVID pandemic, I was working for a different charity, and we were at the heart of community response and coordinating information about community response across the country and feeding that into government. And I was probably working a 16-hour day, 6 days a week, and maybe 10 on the Sunday, because it was so important to get that information in. But actually we all had to, after a while, go, this is not we can't sustain this. We need to look after ourselves. When you're on an aircraft, they always tell you that you should put on your own oxygen mask before helping somebody else with theirs. And I think that's really important when you're in a high pressure, potentially lonely situation. So not really a charity finance answer, but I hope that's my thoughts anyway.
Thanks, Claire. We've got a question from somebody in the chat who's asking about the best place to look for the best saving rates for charity surplus funds. I'm not sure if you'll have the answer to this, but
no. So I can't tell you to go to a particular bank because I'm not a registered financial advisor. We're not registered with the Financial Regulation Authority. So that is a tough one to answer. What I would say is just have a look around online and see what you can find. It will depend how much you've got and how long you're able to tie your funds up for. If you're happy with your banking arrangements at the moment, do ask them if they've got a community savers account or just a regular saving account that can be attached to yours. Problems with banking is one of the huge things we've been doing to try and improve. Basically, some of the work we do is around improving the operating environment for charitable organisations. And I've been doing a long-term piece of work with UK Finance and many banks to try and improve those relationships between banks and charities in two ways, really. The understanding banks have of the myriad different ways that charitable organisations can be structured and the different governance documents you might need to produce to open your account, that kind of thing. And that's really starting to bear fruit now. So if you are having problems with your bank and you want to drop me a line and let me know about those, I will try and feed those back in to the research and the shaping of the landscape that we're doing. Can't promise to fix it, but it would certainly be useful information for me.
Thanks, Claire.
One thing on banking I will say is, there's been a long-standing tradition of banks operating from branches in high streets. That model is really dwindling, and I don't see any sign of it changing direction. So if you are at all able to use digital banking, online banking, then that will make your choice. That will give you a lot more options to try and use online banking.
Great, thank you, Claire. We've got a question in the Q&A which is asking, in terms of forward planning, is there any sense about how long the cost of living crisis is likely to last? Any green shoots? I read something recently forecasting little improvement until early 2024. Does the CFG have any data on this?
Well, we're constantly scanning the policy and political landscape about this. So my current feel is that we may well have a general election later this year rather than it being spring next year. It could in theory be as late as January 2025, but I don't think the government will hold out that long. Most people are suggesting it will be in the spring 2024, but there are now some thoughts it could be autumn this year. The reason for this is because in January, the government spending was less than the money going into the government. So for the first time in ages, they had a kind of cash surplus for a month. And we're thinking that may be redistributed through the budget. So if we're getting some good stuff through the budget, we've just had the Windsor Protocol going, being agreed on, the Windsor Agreement, Windsor deal. The Northern Ireland Brexit situation seems to be finally making some progress. So on the back of that, and possibly some giveaways in the budget coming up, it may make sense for the government to decide to go to an election in the autumn. Don't quote me on that. We've also got local elections coming up in May. The current polling suggests that Labour are on course for a decent result in the next election. But again, I would say there's a long time between now and whenever we get to put our crosses in the boxes. And we don't really know the reason for the big Labour upswing apart from dissatisfaction with the current government. So if the government starts to make a few more positive moves and Labour doesn't come up with a real tangible alternative, other political parties are available, then we may just see currently dissatisfied Conservatives going back to Conservatives. Remember 1992, if you're old enough, Philippa, I don't think you might remember 1992, but everybody thought Labour were on track for a landslide victory, and it just didn't happen. And it was 1997 before we saw a change from Conservative to a Labour government. So, everything to play for at this stage in the political cycle. I would say economically, inflation is slowing, and it is slowing to a degree, but prices are still continuing to rise. So it's not as though inflation's gone into reverse. We're not really seeing any prices coming back down to where they used to be. Energy, we're facing another situation in April when the energy cost cap is reviewed again, and we're not 100% sure what the Chancellor's thinking is around longer term support for energy. But there are some predictions now that the recession will be less deep and less long lasting than was originally feared. I guess that ties in with recovery coming round about the spring of 2024. I wish I could be more optimistic for you. I wish I could I wish I could wave my magic wand and make everything okay. Sadly, I can't. But one thing I do know about the charitable sector is that people are incredible and will just keep going. Please don't push yourself that far. Look after yourselves, and that keep going comes with a look after yourselves caveat, because this is a marathon and not a sprint, and we've got to just keep going, and what you're doing makes a difference.
Thanks, Claire. I think it's really tricky, isn't it? Because I know Charity Excellence Framework are doing forecasts too, but obviously that everyone's working off the same kind of data and things that are published, so it is hard to tell when these things are going to kind of carry on till. I've got a question from someone in the team who's asking, when do you think that smaller organisations should assign funding to reserves? And what would be a good level of reserves, I guess, in terms of percentage of money coming in to have in the bank? These obviously are much smaller organisations than some other big charities, but if you can put money aside, how much should you be kind of aiming to, just for that peace of mind, really?
So the thinking on reserves has really changed significantly as a result of the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we saw people quite often working on a fixed number of months of operating costs, maybe 3 months or 6 months, however long you think it would take. If your money stopped coming in today and you wanted to close down, or you had to close down, you wanted to do it in an orderly fashion, how much money would you need to do that? So I guess that's the first thing to think about. But there comes a point when you might say, well, we've got that much money, we've still got some extra money. What do we do with it? So the purpose of reserves really is protection against a rainy day. And heaven knows it's been absolutely bucketing down for the last significant length of time. So if you don't have any reserves, please don't panic, you're not the only ones. Many people have used their reserves, many organisations have used some or all of their reserves just to keep things going, or to pivot, to change direction slightly to meet needs in a different way. I think probably the best thing I can do is suggest you listen to a really good podcast. I would say this because one of the guests is my boss, Karen Bradshaw. Third Sector did a podcast recently with Karen Bradshaw and Pesh Ramji, formerly of Crow UK Accountants, talking about reserves. We've received a check in dollars. Oh my goodness. So have a listen to that. think about what your reserves are for. Are they rainy day money? Are they money that you're putting away for a future long-term project or for a future development? And just start thinking about that. But also I would say, once you've reached a kind of rainy day fund, are you keeping reserves for the sake of keeping reserves, or are you keeping reserves because you've got a plan for them? And if that plan is going to come to fruition, brilliant. But if you're just wanting to feel extra safe, are you doing the right thing by your beneficiaries? I don't know if that helps.
No, yeah, thank you. That's great.
Yeah, as much as thinking about reserves, it's probably useful to think about things in terms of risk. And if you use that risk lens to understand what the likely, what's likely and what's less likely, what's going to have a big impact, what would have little impact. And that risk paradigm might help you think differently about your reserves as well. If you're keeping money for a rainy day because your version of a rainy day is 15 tigers invading your office, that's high impact, but it's incredibly low likelihood. So maybe you need to rethink what counts as a risk.
Got another question, which is something that I think a lot of people relate to, and we kind of relate to as well, is that funding sources are often kind of project focused, and in small charities that perpetuates the cycle of kind of making a project to raise income. I mean, obviously you need the project and then delivering that full throttle, but it doesn't always help when you're kind of operating on that way to kind of build skills and strengthen the strategy of an organization. So how do you think that small organizations can approach these project focused funding sources to kind of secure funds to develop the skills and capacity of an organization?
So it's really tempting, isn't it, to take on a project because it's got some money attached to it and it broadly fits what you want to do. I think sometimes it's really hard, but ask yourself whether this project is what is in line with, is it going to help you on the way to your strategic objectives? Now, there may be times when you've just got to do something to bring some money in, and that's not saying it's a bad thing. But how far away from your long-term plan is this project going to take you in exchange for how much money? I think that's the calculation I would want him to be looking at. So you might be focused very clearly on your goals, but then have an opportunity to go away and set up a side hustle in your charity of a piano tuning business. Are you piano tuners? No, you're focused on this. So maybe don't take that option. Keep focusing on what your strategic objectives are, what impact you want to have, and do a really hard-nosed calculation of what is this actually going to cost us to deliver this project in terms of how much time realistically, and then add a bit more on because things always take longer than you think. How much of this is going to take people away from doing their activities they're currently doing that we need them to do? How much do we need to spend to backfill that? How much can we take towards our core activities? So a recent funding bid I wrote included 7% towards your core funding to kind of cover that back office, the admin-y things. Is that realistic? Is that enough? And in a smaller charity, that might not be enough. You might want to be thinking like 15% of this because we've only got 3 people that do all these things. We need to make sure we've got that covered properly. So firstly, be incredibly realistic and hard-nosed about the amount of time and the amount of effort and the other resources and the cost it's going to take you to deliver this project. Then think about the add-ons, think about your core costs, and think about building in some resilience funding to that as well. And third, just keep checking and see if this does take you. It might not take you to your destination as a charity, but is the bus you're thinking of getting on going in broadly the right direction, or is it going in the other direction or over somewhere you don't want to go? So they're my real things for that. I would also say, again, have a look at this, the work that Ivor did around the resilience funding and including that very clearly in your funding ask. My background's not finance. My background's communications and campaigning and winning hearts and minds rather than adding things up on a spreadsheet. And I would say, what's your story? Tell your story in the most powerful way you can. to capture that imagination and to show what a difference it is you're making to people's lives. And do you know what? I think if you're making a difference to people's lives, you might be helping 30 people, or you might be helping 3,000 people. But those are people who need you. So how do you tell their story and your story together to really strengthen your funding asks?
Thanks, Claire.
Yeah.
Finally, just a question from me. I've heard a lot during the cost of living crisis about kind of building partnerships, the power of partnerships and collaboration to help us through. And I really agree with that. But I think when you see it on paper, sometimes it ignores how difficult it is to actually build partnerships and collaborations, because everyone does things differently, everyone communicates differently, and actually it can be really difficult to get things off the ground. And I wanted, in terms of actually practically banding together, building those partnerships, where do you think small organizations in these times can actually do that and see an impact? Where do you think are the best touch points for building those collaborations?
So, well, something, it's a cliche, but somebody said to me a few times recently, if you want to go fast, go on your own. If you want to go far, go together, because you will be able to support each other in ways that you didn't know about. And I think for me, that's the first thing about partnerships, is really that support, being part of a network, being part of a shared endeavour to change the world, even if your specific goals aren't the same. So Charity Finance's goals are not the same as Akivo's goals, the Association of Chief Execs of Voluntary Organisations. They're not the same as SCVO, Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations, but we all of us share a vision of a more supportive operating environment for the charitable sector. So firstly, I'd say find the people that share your vision. What do you have in common? And then start informally. Don't go straight into we want to share our payroll services with somebody else. We want to share premises with somebody else. Start to think about, work from your values and your belief in what better looks like, and really make sure you've got that connection with each other. But also, I would say it doesn't have to be a big formal thing. It could be as simple as having half an hour a week or an hour a fortnight on Zoom, when you know that your peers will be there and somebody will be there, and you might go along and there'll be two other people, and you just have a cup of tea and go, isn't it awful? But actually this week this has happened. So that's the other thing, is share your successes with each other. You will really start to develop a positive network there. And sometimes it's as simple as, we're writing a letter to these people about our issue. Would anybody else like to sign it, because the general principles also apply to their issue? So that whole kind of shared signatories on letter writing. Yeah, all of those things. Try and just think about how you can support each other. And I would say for every half hour you can put in supporting somebody from another, supporting another organisation, is probably a half hour you'll feel really well spent. I'm not saying you should just spend 35 hours a week supporting other organisations, because that's not how it's going to work. But and rely on people like Philippa, because infrastructure organisations, whether it's Beacon for Rare Diseases, Charity Finance Group, NCVO, we're all here to answer some of those frequently asked questions, to be a sounding board, to be your cheerleaders. So make use of us.
Yeah, I agree, Claire. We get messages through and we always try and help out. And Laura, our fundraiser, is always open to kind of answering questions as well, or having a chat via Zoom. Also, people in the chat having a lot of the same issues. What we've seen happen before is people sharing phone numbers, starting WhatsApp groups, and actually, chatting. Even if you're just kind of chatting about how annoying things are, sometimes that can lead to a solution. And we'd encourage you to get in touch, because obviously we know people who've tackled what you're trying to tackle, and they can kind of give you lessons as well.
So the 19th to the 23rd of June is Small Charity Week, and this is run by the FSI in partnership with various other infrastructure organisations, and it will include, as usual, a big advice days, a fundraising day, an appreciation day when it's your chance to shout about what you do, but also say thank you to people. And so please do have a look at Small Charity Week website and keep an eye on that for activities that are coming out. During that week, CFG, probably shouldn't tell you this because I'd quite like you all to join CFG, but we will be making our small charity resources available beyond outside our paywall for that week. If you can't wait till then, sign up for the newsletter or drop me a line. Might be able to do something.
So thank you so much, Claire. And I hope to see all of you who've attended here very soon again.